In early February 1989, a man named Alec Newald set out from his hometown of Rotorua, New Zealand, towards the city of Auckland. The journey from Rotorua to Auckland normally takes 3 hours, and Alec expected to arrive within that time frame. However, upon arriving in Auckland, he was bewildered by the crowd, cheers, joy, worry, and all kinds of positive emotions that awaited him. Even the police had come to see him. He had become an instant celebrity, and he couldn't understand why. When Alec asked what had caused all the commotion, he learned that he had been missing for 10 days. How had a 3-hour journey turned into 10 days? This was a question only Alec could answer. The only problem was, Alec didn't know where he had been or how he had gone missing for 10 days. When concerned family members asked him where he had been, he couldn't give a clear answer. On top of that, he started having terrible headaches and fatigue, and he was having trouble focusing. This was starting to become normal for Alec until he slowly began to remember. When he finally remembered what had happened, his explanation shocked not only his family but the entire world. Alec had been abducted by aliens. One minute I was driving the car, the next minute the car was gone, and I didn't really feel like I had a body. This is where the death scenario comes in. I felt like I had been passed through a sieve. All the solid parts had been sifted out, and I was a glowing ghost-like being, hovering above the ground in a huge area with no walls around me. There were ghost-like beings in the distance. This was an excerpt from an interview where Alec recounted his abduction. He initially thought he had died, and that his soul had passed from this world to the next. Then strange-looking creatures appeared before him. At first, he thought they were ghosts, but they looked so bizarre that the ghost idea didn't make sense. The creatures were very thin, average height, and had very narrow eyes and large heads compared to humans. Their faces were bigger. That's when he realized these were aliens. Although the aliens didn't say anything with their mouths, Alec could feel their thoughts in his head. It was as if they were speaking telepathically. "Welcome," one said. "I am the assigned guardian of this section. If there is anything you need to make your stay more enjoyable, please ask, and I will do my best to provide it for you. The garment you have been given will allow you to understand us, and us to understand you." The alien told Alec that he wouldn't stop him if he wanted to leave, but he hoped he would stay because they were eager to share a lot of information with him about everything. After this encounter, Alec was taken to their city, which he described in his book as so orderly and large that I couldn't define its boundaries. Yes, Alec recounted what happened to him in a book called Coevolution, an Interplanetary Adventure. If you do a quick Google search, you can see where to buy the book and learn more about his adventure. Alec's description of the alien city dwarfed the buildings on Earth. There may be bigger cities on Earth, but where I come from, this would be huge. It stretched beyond my vision in both directions, following the coastline. It was as if there was a thin strip of land that wasn't coastline or desert, and the city was crammed within this. The last thing that struck me was the lack of tall buildings, apart from 1 or 2 towers, and the dominance of small circular shapes amongst a few large pyramid-shaped structures. The buildings appeared to be made of a material that looked like colored glass or translucent plastic. I couldn't quite see the top of these buildings, but I later realized that they were capped with a spiral tower or antenna arrangement. The height of the tower added about 25% to the overall height of the building. Each building was covered with what I can only describe as a large light bulb. Alec made drawings of the buildings he saw in his book. He described the architecture of the buildings he saw, even the house and room he stayed in, and admired their beauty. But the real reason for his abduction was not sightseeing. The aliens wanted to pass on information to him, which he would then pass on to others. According to the aliens, there are many untold stories in Earth's history. Much of this information about Earth's true history is carefully guarded by a small group of secret societies that prevent this information from reaching the public. I won't lie, this made sense to me as I was reading this part. There are many things about our universe that only a select few know, and the public is forced to fill in the blanks to the best of their ability. But these societies weren't always secret. When this information was given to them, the original plan was to share this ancient knowledge with everyone, but I guess plans change. The alien talked about 2 species of the human race, Homo sapiens and Cro-Magnon. Apparently, the ancestral species of both Homo sapiens and Cro-Magnon were created by humans about 70,000 years ago. When the final pieces of the Cro-Magnon puzzle were put together, it was revealed that Cro-Magnon was not the first hominid to live on Earth, but the first being designed so that a second disembodied being could live with it and experience physicality through the host's solid outer body form. You know how almost every religion on earth believes that the body is different from the soul or spirit. Christianity believes in saving your soul and not letting your body dictate your life. The same is true for Islam, and that's why some misguided people distort it to turn people into suicide bombers, because they believe their souls will be saved and that this body is nothing more than a vessel. Our real life begins after the apocalypse, so this is not our real life. This world is a paradise for pagans, a hell for Muslims. We just have to be patient. This is almost the same as what the aliens told Alec. After Cro-Magnon, they made a new species that could remember everything that was kept for them and use it at any time in the future. So their mental capacity was already fully formed, and at that point, they didn't need any further development or evolutionary change. All the information this race would need until its next evolutionary step was already on the planet and under the supervision of the trustees, which he believed to be Homo sapiens. The alien who revealed most of this information was a female alien named Xena. She told Alec how some of her people came to Earth, how some stayed behind, and how some moved on. Even the pyramids were ancient legacies left behind by some of their ancestors to help us wake up when the time was right. Xena described how special and beautiful Earth is, and therefore there are many external forces that desire Earth for their own purposes. While reading the book, Darkseid from DC Comics or Loki from Marvel's Avengers came to mind. One thing Xena shared that intrigued me was about a dark force that came to Earth. The dark force wanted Earth for itself, and it did. According to Xena, the dark force is still among us. After this force won your planet, it realized that it would have a constant war on its hands because you were not as you are now. You were progressing on the path of enlightenment with a very strong spiritual foundation. In fact, you were almost as strong as this power. To subdue you, it had to trick you, and while you were down, it changed your structure, your DNA. It actually crippled you, stunted you, and took you back thousands of years. It turned you into what you are today, which is only a fraction of the greatness you could be because you haven't fully healed yet. And if that power has its way, you never will. This power is known by most as the power of darkness because it is truly the enemy of enlightenment. It is in the air you breathe and everywhere. It has aligned itself with the planet. And now, as I was reading this part, I couldn't help but draw parallels between different cultures that talk about how advanced humans were in the past. But war, greed, lust, and the dark hearts of humans caused us to lose a lot. The Bible talks about a human race that was superior to everything until the Apple incident, and this alien voiced their own version of it. Many incredible stories were shared between the two. Xena talked about the underwater base she and her people lived in on Earth, and how they were in contact with the people in power, sharing information with them to get them to share it with the rest of humanity. But they decided that the population was not ready for this message. Even if I don't believe anything in this story, I definitely believe this. Again, many intriguing narratives with supposed evidence and facts make you question a lot of things. I can't cover them all. It would make this video much longer than it needs to be, but you can get the book yourself and read it. Finally, after fascinating encounters, history lessons, short trips and spaceship rides, yes, Alec was taken on a ride in a spaceship, and long talks about sex, yes, that was discussed too, he was sent back to Earth, to the same spot where he was before the abduction. This explained why he felt no time had passed because he was in the same car, but in reality, he had spent 10 days on an alien planet. When Alec revealed just some of this information to the public, what happened to him was no different than a thriller movie. There were no words to describe what had happened to him. The police, SIS, scientists, the CIA, everyone wanted to know about these aliens Alec was talking about, and they weren't being very polite. Alec started to notice he was being followed. The same car he had never seen before suddenly started parking at the end of his street, 2 houses down. He decided to move to a new place and environment, but he was still followed. When they could no longer follow him, they decided to contact him and ask him questions. Once, he was weakly accused of being a Nazi because his father's ancestry could be traced back to Germany. Yet he had lived in New Zealand all his life. It was a funny accusation for Alec at the time. They said they could make my life very difficult if I didn't cooperate. But at that stage, it seemed like there was nothing they could do to me. So I thanked them very much for their friendly advice and slammed the door in their faces. This was another big mistake on my part, and suddenly, Alec's life seemed to be going from one bad experience to another. It was all set up by these agencies. Alec was a motor vehicle salesman, at least until then, because the 1987 stock market crash meant there was no longer a viable trade in New Zealand. Although he was no longer a licensed motor vehicle salesman, he occasionally bought and sold cars privately. One day, he met a gentleman at a well-known car auction in Auckland. He said his name was Jeff Wright, and that he had access to cheap, used Japanese import cars with wholesale stock. He wanted to sell the stock that dealerships didn't need or had too much of. Alec had no reason to doubt what Jeff was saying, and after some research Alec did, he decided Jeff was telling the truth. So he went into business with Jeff. They worked together for 9 months. Jeff would call Alec when there was a car he thought he might be interested in buying. Sometimes he would buy them. Sometimes if he didn't have the money, Alec would turn them down. Did Alec know this was all a plan to set him up? Apparently all the cars Jeff had supplied to Alec were stolen, or so it seemed to the court. There were 6 cars in this scam. The police were so eager about everything that they even tried to prosecute him for cars that weren't stolen, but he was in trouble, which was perfect for these agencies. The agencies had done a pretty good job. Cleverly, they let me think about everything for a while before they visited me again. It was just as you'd expect. Cooperate, and we'll sort things out with the police. Alec was still stubborn, and his case, which should have taken a maximum of 6 months, dragged on for 2 years with over 20 court sessions. These people were meticulous and seemed to be able to reach every corner of my life. There was no doubt they had done this sort of thing before, but to whom and for what reason? How many people before me had suffered the same fate? I was rapidly losing faith in every part of our so-called justice system. I knew this was just a game to them, but it was my life they were playing with. Alec was broke. His assets had been taken from him. He didn't even have the money to hire a lawyer. All this was to get Alec to talk about his interactions with the alien, everything he had learned, but for some reason, Alec said no to them. After 2 years of the case, he lost. I had to serve half of my 12-month sentence. Following the trial, this meant I actually had plenty of time to reassess my situation regarding writing my story in full detail. It was no longer a private matter the world had a right to know, and that's what pushed him to write his book. So even if all this is fiction and made up, why did the agency go to such lengths to get him to talk? This was before he published his book. The only logical argument was that they believed Alec's testimony and wanted so much information from him. If they could have kidnapped him and taken him to a dark place, they probably would have. But does that mean Alec is telling the truth? Did he really meet aliens? The truth is, this sounds more like fiction than reality. Alec claimed that humans are related to aliens, and aliens are related to humans from the future, and they know how to move through time. Interestingly, the extraterrestrial beings Alec encountered are almost extinct due to the choices made by their ancestors, humans from Earth. So they regularly go back in time to change things, to make the present better so they can make their own lives better. This is unbelievable and similar to almost all science fiction stories. In addition to all this, Alec talks in his book about his relationship with a female alien, whom he says is out of this world beautiful, both physically and metaphorically. And when this thing looked at me, as I said before, if it had a face, I froze. There were long conversations about reproduction, but that's not what raised my eyebrows. It's this story. I was actually walking on a dragon line. I was walking on a dragon line that went to the school or intersected with one. And right in this park, on that dragon line, just like a lightning strike, there would be a flash of light, and it would get my attention. What was happening around me at the time? People say, well, how come nobody could see you going into a vortex? As a kid, you chase seagulls, in the park. This was near a harbor, and there were seagulls in this park, and I would chase them. And whenever that light flashed, the seagulls in the park would freeze. So there was some sort of time intervention pattern set up there. Obviously, my time hadn't changed, and the beings coming out of that light hadn't changed their movements, but everything around me had frozen. So, anybody outside the perimeter of that vortex, my time was probably 1,000 or 100,000 times faster than theirs. So, this interview is an hour long. The link to watch it in its entirety is in the description below. Apparently, this wasn't his first encounter with a UFO incident. As a child, he had an experience where only he saw the aliens. So he suddenly remembers encountering aliens as a child. I don't know. It sounds very suspicious to me. And of course, you had to wait and buy the third version of his book to learn more about this encounter. There are many gaps in the story he tells in this interview. Why was he the only one who witnessed these aliens in the park? He claims the incident was random and rarely happened. But in the same statement, he talks about how the seagulls froze when the lights flashed. He describes it as if it were a normal thing, or as if he had experienced this phenomenon more than once, and at the same time as if it were the first time. It doesn't make any sense. He even tries to create a history of his life before his famous abduction, claiming that he was prepared by aliens when he was young, to create a narrative as if the event that happened in his life was destined to be, like a prequel to a good movie. I was being trained from the age of 5, so I could understand that they were trying to prepare me for something that was going to happen later in my life. I guess, so, even if you accept these things at the age of 5, I forgot those things in adulthood. Now, I'm not saying with absolute certainty that aliens don't exist, or refuting the countless claims of others. The universe is too big for us to be alone in it. But when it comes to Alec Newald's story, there are many gaps that raise my eyebrows. Given the information shared in the book, the actual abduction experience sounds fascinating and realistic. But when you factor in his childhood experience, which he claims to have forgotten, the story starts to lose credibility, and you wonder if he was really abducted or just a good writer. Because I won't lie, the book is a good read, and even if you don't believe the abduction story, the book itself is a pretty good fiction novel. Either way, I'll leave you with a quote from Lord Admiral Hill Norton, former head of the British Ministry of Defence and head of the NATO Military Committee. There is a serious possibility that we are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer one space, from other civilizations, that it behooves to us to find out who they are, where they come from, and what they want. This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation, and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers. So do you think Alec was abducted or just a great writer?